Okay, this is part 3 to chapter 4. Excuse me. I apologize for the abrupt ending on part 2, but I realized there was some things in my slide deck that were not going to be shown on the screen, so I had to close it and start again. We were going through the steps in the market research process, and we had talked about setting research objectives and the type of survey design. Step 3 deals with collecting the information. And a lot of people, when they think about market research or any type of research, mostly what they think about is this part, is the actual data collection component. Just keep in mind that there were steps before this and a lot of planning that had already occurred. So the data collection phase is usually the most expensive because this is when you're actually having to go out and either talk to people or pay people to take surveys, or maybe you're doing some kind of test marketing research, so some production cost may occur. You may be hiring a market research firm to conduct the research for you, and that's expensive. If you're doing focus groups, you're renting a room and you are renting equipment, and you're also paying people to come in, you're paying a moderator. So there's a lot of costs involved in a lot of most data collection, and it really varies depending on what kind of research you're conducting. It's also the point at which most of the errors in research can occur. If someone does not follow the instructions properly, maybe some of the measures you have are not reliable, or if you get incomplete data, those can be problems for evaluation later on. In terms of the people and the respondents, they may be hard to get. They may not have online access or be inaccessible for whatever reason. And sometimes then they have to either be contacted again, which is time and money, or new participants have to take their place. Sometimes people will actually just refuse to take part or cooperate, and that could lead to biased and error data. Let's see. So from there, let's talk about the 5 main research approaches. Now, we talked about qualitative and quantitative data already, and these will lend themselves to usually one of those or the other, but they're not mutually exclusive. Observational research typically is only gathering qualitative data. It's usually just watching people and seeing how they do something, like how they shop or move through a store, how they maybe eat their dinner. A restaurant may be interested to know what do they eat first, second, and third? Where do they like to sit? How long do they stay there? So there could be some quantitative measures that they're marking off as they go along, but a lot of observational research, which is simply watching and taking note of what you see, tends to be qualitative. Focus groups, which I've mentioned, is when you bring about six to eight, sometimes as many as 10, but usually no more than that. Bring people together into a room, sit around a table, and you have a topic to discuss. So, for example, for Domino's, they conducted some focus groups and they had people talk about the pizza, what they thought about it. And they did that also when they reformulated the pizza. They had people come in and talk about what they thought of the new taste. Usually, when that occurs, the product, the brand name, they try to remain anonymous so that people aren't automatically biased by the brand names. But in this case, people are getting together. They're kind of having a conversation in a group, and the purpose is to really uncover the real reasons or motivations that are likely to affect marketing outcomes like purchase intentions or repeat behavior or loyalty, and things like that. Typically, again, that is mostly qualitative type data that comes from focus groups. It's all words, sentences, comments that need to be interpreted. Let's move over here for a second to behavioral data, behavioral research. Behavioral research can take quite a few different forms. It's the actuality of what people do, but it can be observed in things like scanner data or databases. If you think of a company like Kroger as a really easy example, and you have your Kroger loyalty card, they're tracking everything that you buy. So that's real behavioral data. They know how often you buy milk or a certain type of cereal. They know how much of it you buy, and they know at what price points. So there's a lot of really rich information that comes from your behavior of visiting the store and what's in your shopping cart. And this is really useful because they can link it to link these actual actions that you've taken to other information. If you filled out the Kroger sign up form when you did your loyalty card, they most likely have information about you, including your age, your gender, probably where you live, and some of the basic demographics that can help them gain a good understanding of people like you. What are you likely to respond to? And can they use that in marketing activity? Now, experiments are considered to be the most scientifically valid type of research. Experiments are, I would say, 99.9% of the time, they are quantitative in nature. And the reason for that is experiments rely on more complex statistical analysis. And what experiments are looking for are the cause and effect relationships. And they will yield a high level of confidence in the results because of the experimental design. An easy example to just think about an experiment would be something like if a firm wants to change the style of their packaging. Let's just use ice cream, for example. Let's say Breyers wants to change the size of their ice cream container, which they actually have done recently. I'll show you some statistics on that in a minute. And they want to know if we change the size of our ice cream container, we go from a half gallon to something a little smaller, will consumers respond negatively? So they're looking for the relationship between the size of the container decreasing and consumer response. And consumer response is probably in terms of sales. Okay, are they buying that ice cream at the same rate of sale? And so they may have a test period of a couple of weeks in certain geographic areas. And then they can compare that smaller size container sales to sales of their regular half gallon of ice cream. And that would be considered an experiment that you could have very high confidence in the results. And I'll show you a little bit more on that in a second. Now, survey research is what we're going to deal mostly with in this class, and that you will be using in your infographic. Now, survey research, you may also hear the term questionnaire. Questionnaires are probably the most common research instrument used in survey research, but surveys are predominantly used in order to assess and measure people's knowledge, beliefs or belief structures, attitudes, and preferences that, if the sample is somewhat representative of the population, you can then generalize those findings to a larger group and make more informed marketing decisions. So we'll take a look at a couple of these. And what I would like you to do is take a look at the screen and determine, based on what you've seen here, what type of research approach was used in order to yield the information that you see. So if you don't have your notes in front of you, maybe write these 5 things down really quickly, and then I'll show you about three or four of these. So here's the data that's presented here. And what it's showing is the top 10 corporate brands that people were talking about on Facebook. And this is, in a certain time frame. And what they show here is that Coca-Cola was the most talked about brand. And these were the other 9. So if you were to guess, I hope that you had guessed that this is behavioral data. All that's been done here is someone had used some kind of query or wrote a code to extract conversations and mentions on Facebook for brands, and this is what came up the most, was Coca-Cola. So this is behavioral data, and this would probably be considered big data if you look at the sheer number of comments. 1 million here, close to 1 million here, 750,000, so forth. So when you have this many data points, you would consider that big data, if you've heard that term before. Let's look at this one. Same thing. See if you can determine what type of data this was, what research approach, based on what you're shown here. And these are the most popular brands searched online based on gender. So now we're kind of breaking it apart and refining it a little bit. And I hope that you would have realized that this is also behavioral data. All that's been done here is they have basically drawn a line in the sand between males and females, and they're showing that females and males search for different things, but these were still the top, 5 for each gender. So that's a really, interesting way to look at this behavioral data. Here's another one. I guess I'm cheating this one. And by the way, I want to point out that these past 2, this is simply a chart, so not technically an infographic yet. This is somewhat of an infographic, but they're not showing you any numbers, so it's a little bit of a lazy one. But this one is a very good infographic. Okay, so there's a title here that tells you what the images and the numbers are about. Me time, okay, personal vacation, earned time off, generational differences. This is a very good one. Has a good flow to it, has good images, has good points to talk about. But this was really gathered from what we call survey research. They've assessed and measured people's preferences and beliefs and some maybe little behavioral things. But this is more than likely was gathered from survey research. So here's some of their feelings and attitudes here. Things they say they do. So behavioral data and what people say they do are not really the same thing. If you could track what people actually do, watch them all day long or every day and make click points about where they actually go and what they actually do, that would be behavioral data. But this is based on asking them what they do. So they're self-reporting. So that's still survey research. And this is how they feel, okay, about time off between millennials and baby boomers. So, again, pretty easy to assess. This came from survey research. Now this one here, it's not really an infographic, it's really just a chart, but this came from, could have come from an experiment. So remember I talked about the ice cream. A couple of years ago, food costs had really increased in a lot of different categories, and manufacturers realized that they needed to cut costs. I had a gentleman come in from a local market research firm, and he talked about how he worked on the Pop-Tarts account for Kellogg's. And Kellogg's had said, we really need to try to reduce our costs in some areas, and we're thinking about making Pop-Tarts smaller. But we want to know if people will realize and recognize that they're getting less product. So they conducted the research for Kellogg's, and what they determined was nobody could tell. So they ended up making Pop-Tarts smaller. So if you're a Pop-Tart eater, maybe you noticed, but chances are you didn't. So these companies, same thing. Now these are in British pounds. It was just the best little chart I could find. And all of these companies had the same thing about a decade ago. They needed to cut costs, so they tested, could we reduce the size of our package and still see our sales revenue, our sales rate stay about the same? And most of them found that consumers didn't really notice. So, it was pretty easy to make that decision. And again, that's an experiment. So step 4 deals with the analysis. Now, the graphics I just showed you demonstrate already the analysis that has taken place. But the important part of analysis is to extract the findings, tabulate the data in whatever way is appropriate, and then develop some summary measures. Averages are something that you will do that are important. Also, sometimes percentages or measures of dispersion for major variables. Dispersion would mean, how many, in a multiple choice question, how many people answered A, how many people answered B. You'll do that type of thing with a pivot table. We won't do any advanced statistical techniques, but you may have in a previous class. And if you haven't yet, you may, in a class that you take in statistics, conduct t-tests, analysis of variance, simple correlations. If that's something you're interested in, talk to me about it, because we can do those things in Excel pretty easily as well. But the point of those is to discover additional findings that may help us make decisions in the future. These down here are some of the most common data analysis programs. We're using Excel, which is completely fine for what we're doing, very, very basic. I use SPSS for most of the research that I do. SAS is another one, but it's writing a lot of code, and same with R. R is a free statistical analysis program that's become very popular in the analytics realm. So you may have heard of that before. Okay, step 5 then is to present the findings. And one challenge, I think, in presenting the findings is determining what is the most important thing to present. What you may realize, even with the simple survey that we will do, is you're going to probably have way more information than you can present or should present. So one of the challenges is, what are the most interesting outcomes? You should always be reflecting back on the research question and the research objective, right? But is there anything else there that makes sense to present? So you have to then translate the data and your findings into information and insights that you can recommend to management in order to make good decisions. So I have 2 infographics here to show you. These both I think are very good. This one is about mobile in-store research. So, you're out at Target and you're thinking of buying something, and then you go, well, wait a minute, let me see what this sells for on Amazon. I don't know if you do that. I do that everywhere I go. And I realize it makes me stay in the store for a very long time. So what they found, are these things. And I imagine that the data set that they had for each of these had way more information than they're presenting here, but these are the most important things that seemed relevant. Okay. And the research question, the research objective was probably, how do people use mobile devices when they're shopping in a store? That's my guess, based on what I see here, as being the research question or the research objective. Okay. So this is why I'm spending so much time in the store. 15 minutes just using a phone in the store. That's a lot of time. I think my husband is in and out of the store in 10 minutes or less. So same thing over here, right? They wanted to understand how men and women shop differently when buying a shirt. And there's a lot of research on how men and women are very different in terms of their shopping behaviors. But this, again, very good infographic, a good title, tells you what it's about right here. You know, they are talking about men versus women, so a good graphic of a male and a female. And you may not have access, depending on what program you use to make your infographic, but do the best you can with using imagery to kind of tell the story and then integrate the data, the pertinent data, where appropriate. Okay. So we're going to get, when you get into the project, if you haven't already read the instructions, now is definitely a good time to do that. But this is what your final versions, should look like. Something, with a lot of images. You can use bar charts and graphs to some degree if you want to. Pull out the main points of the research. What are the main findings? And this is just a quick little table. It comes from your textbook about the characteristics of good marketing research. And I left it in here because I think it's wise to read through it. We're not really using scientific method, but we are using elements of scientific method in terms of sampling and analysis. Let's see. We're really only going to rely on one method. I'm talking about number 3. But if you remember, we talked about primary and secondary data. We talked about qualitative and quantitative type of study designs. Really good research actually combines a lot of these things together. There may be a focus group where you learn what people really don't like about your product. And then from there, you maybe conduct surveys. You can get more of a generalization about, these 5 things that people said they didn't like in the focus group. How much does that exist in a larger population? And then you make changes to your product, and then maybe you conduct an experiment to see if it really improved. So multiple methods are used in good and robust and rigorous research. Yeah, so take a read through here. I mean, some of them aren't going to make as much sense to you. The last one, ethical marketing, that's sort of a no-brainer. We try to be ethical in the way that we conduct research. There's a lot of scary stories from the early part of the 20th century about medical research that was very unethical. People were being, subjected to studies without their knowledge. So, it's not as probably prevalent in marketing research, but it is important to think about the right way to treat people and to provide information where needed. You never want to invade someone's privacy or make them identifiable later unless they choose to be so. All right, so our very final step here is making a decision. So just as a quick example, the decision from this experiment, when finding that people didn't really notice the change in the package size, brands decided to produce smaller packages that sold for the same price. So that would have been an example of the decision that was made. And that's the end of chapter 4.